It's the morning star drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
Hey guys, how is it going? And welcome to the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. It is Wednesday, August 23rd, and so happy for you joining us. We are ready to start another day together with the Lord. So subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. So today we have an exciting podcast for you. We have Health is Happiness, the Bible word study on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and of course commentaries, updates, and news on what is happening around the world in this history today. All right, everyone, how are you doing? Yes, it is already Wednesday. We've got service tonight. Hope you guys are really praying for your preachers to do well. If you haven't yet, go ahead, leave a like and comment to build our community. Just super happy for everyone joining us every weekday on the Morning Star Drive. So let's get up and support each other each and every day. This week's message, it's about learn from me, be perfect like God. And then, of course, those who speak and act without checking, if you don't stop, all the harm will go back to you. So here it is, guys. This is very awesome week so far. We're already on the 23rd, which means we have like a week left. Is it a week? Because 23rd, 7 days with 30. Oh, there's a 31st too. So we have like 8 days left before September comes around. And that's pretty crazy, guys. Like September's going to come around, is around the corner. And I'm just like, wow. Time is moving so quickly, especially for today's Wednesday service. Make sure that you pray for all your preachers to do well, support them, pray for them, give them good feedback after the service, encourage them and stuff like that too. I'm looking forward to the Wednesday service tonight too. After such a piercing and powerful message, all the different imagery I had in my head, it was kind of, I was just like, wow, I'm interested to see what the Wednesday message is going to be like. Well, on a lighter note, so have you guys ever felt incomplete in what you were wearing? You know what I mean? Like, here's something where, where Sunstream talks a lot in parables. He's like going, yeah, isn't it so it's so incomplete if you're wearing a suit, but yet you're wearing sandals with it, right? It just makes it incomplete. It makes the whole thing look kind of weird or kind of thing like that, right? And he's like, in the same way, if you don't make yourselves, you'll be like someone who's got a suit jacket with shorts or suit jacket with sandals or whatever it is like this. And it's like, yeah, you need to make yourself so you become complete. And I kind of experienced it over the weekend on Sunday because I have no dress shoes. And it's not that I didn't have dress shoes before. It's just that the week before, it was so weird, okay? So I went to church fully dressed, my dress shoes, everything else. I came back home, and when I'm taking off my shoes, it just fell apart. The heels came off, and then the even bottom part fell off from the shoe. I'm like, how the heck did I even make it through service kind of thing, right? So I got, after that, I'm just like, man. And then I just, for a week, you're not really thinking about, oh, I got to buy dress shoes this week. I just forgot to buy dress shoes. And last week I was wearing a full suit with sneakers. They're not even clean sneakers. They were dirty sneakers. You look in the mirror or you look in the reflection in the window, it just looks so awkward. And it was kind of like where the Sunday message came out, is this is how it feels when you're not fully made, right? You're just not fully accepted. And I thought to myself, I was like, man, I got to buy dress shoes this week. It's already Wednesday. And if you guys can do me a good favor, can you remind me in the comments on Friday's comments? Remind me on Friday to buy dress shoes. I need to buy these, or I just feel like I can't go through that again. Go to Sunday service in sneakers with a suit on. I can't do that. So please remind me for Friday, because I will be, Friday's my day off, and that's the day I'll go out for shopping and stuff, but I know I'm going to forget. I can feel I'm going to forget. I just do. So please do me a favor. I played basketball last night again, and my body is just wrecked. I'm wrecked, right? What is that? I should have taken a nice bath. There's a guy in the church here that after he plays sports, he takes a bath just to relax his muscles. I was like, oh, I should have done that. But, after playing sports, I struggle with pre-dawn the next day. I really do. It's just because my whole body is aching. And this is, guys, this is not an age thing, okay? This is about competition. It's about, like even professional athletes play and they're sore the next day. So yeah, it's not about okay, wait. Maybe it's partly because I'm old. Okay, partly. I'm not going to say fully, but this morning, I woke up for pre-dawn, I prayed, it was a little bit struggle, I was like, oh, I gotta get back to bed. And then after I got back to bed, it was like 4 hours later, I finally woke up again. It was a terrible feeling. Like, oh, I just wasted the morning. But yeah, I gotta get myself, well, I am kind of in shape. It's just that some of the sports take a lot more energy. Like when I played volleyball on Sunday, it wasn't too bad the next day, but basketball is crazy for me. So I'm just like, ugh. Oh, here's an interesting thing that I read on the internet. Actually, this is from a tweet from Elon Musk, and I was listening to this, and this is not a good sign, but it's talking about the world birth rates. Okay, so here's some things in here. It's just ridiculous. So the first one is about Japan. So these are about birth rates. Japan had its largest total drop in population since 1968. The U.S. population is flatlining. It's not growing because the birth rate is stagnant, right? It's stagnating. So, that means it's flatlining, which means at least it's keeping its population now. China's fertility rate hits a record low. Singapore birth rate falls to record low. The UK births hit a 20-year low. Italy's birth rate drops to historic low, and once again, South Korea breaks the record for the world's lowest fertility rate again. And the last time I saw it, it was at 0.71, which means it's probably like 0.6 something. And just to let you guys know, remember, in order for a country to maintain their population, their birth rate should be around 2.24 births per couple that's able to have children, and that's to keep your population. So if it's supposed to be at 2.24 but it's like below 0.7, there is that's a quarter. No, is it a quarter? Yeah, it's a quarter. It's basically a quarter of what it should be. So and one of the things when you look at countries like Japan and Korea is they're kind of xenophobic, right? So it's very difficult to get to citizenship and stuff over there. It's really, really difficult. So they're not gaining anything from immigration. It's all about inside the Koreans being just from Korea itself. And that birth rate is at the lowest fertility rate, the world's lowest fertility rate. It broke the record again. Yeah, so it's been breaking records for months and months schedule. So this is something that's quite alarming when you think about it. And it does make me think about Providence too. Is what's the Providence birth rate going to be also? Because I told you guys before, just in Korea, when you have such a large population of married couples, it was at 3 until until the fifth blessing group. And then after that, it dropped to 1. So you do know that there are less and less births happening. And especially in Korea, when you have the fertility rate is at the world record lowest, you're seeing that not only is that entire country going to have a problem, but even on top of it, when we don't have enough guys, it's going to make it even worse. And, this is something I do think we may even need to pray about altogether, because South Korea definitely needs to pray. Japan has to pray too. Italy, the UK, Singapore, they're all dropping. These are all record lows and such. The US seems okay because it's flatlining, but once it hits below flatline, that means the population is gonna continuously be lowering more and more. So these are all signs I look at where God is talking about we better recognize what is happening to this world right now. And how much change is that? How much of this change is actually that good? When you look at, say, for instance, politics, or you look at medicine or technology, right? The way children are, how they're being raised, wokeness, all these things, we do have to look at them a little bit better than we did before, or more detailed, because a lot of this, just from the results of what we see is happening around the world, there's something that's wrong with the way the world is moving, right? And of course, the answer we're going to give is people need to start coming back to God, right? And not just coming back to God, but we have to think about what God wants more than what I want, right? It can't be just, well, I want to do this, so I'm going to do this anyways. It should be like, what is missing right now in this world that we're not able to do the things that God really wants, right? Because if it's done the way that God wants, then all these things should be getting better and better and better. When you look at the large scale of the world, right? But we can obviously see the way people are thinking, the way we look at whatever it's discrimination, misogyny, racism, all these are the different things that are coming out right now with politics, birth rates, natural disasters. We do know something is going wrong, right? Because the result is not God's blessing. The result is God's blessings have been taken away instead, right? And I think that is something we do need to think about more than, well, I believe that it should be like this. I believe that men should be like this, or women should be like this, or people should be like this, or people should be like all these things. I do think we have to rethink them over again, or we're going to actually cause more damage, right? And seeing that God's blessing is going to be taken off this world, right? And we can't help but to see that it does affect providence. It really does, right? It's not like, even for me now, when I think more deeply about it, it's not just about what's wrong with guys. Why aren't there more guys in providence? But we see it's a deeper problem, like in society itself, where the guys are much more weakened than they were before. The way they think, the way they are, the way they feel, the things that they can do and cannot do, right? So this is something that I do think we should be thinking about more deeply, and we should be kind of pushing our minds to reach like a higher level of like enlightening, right? Realizing what is going on, kind of thing, right? So when I look at these things going on around the world, I think all of us will agree that it's not right. And God's blessings are not being given, but they're being taken away. And that's why we see such poor results. So that was something, just looking at the birth rate, I was really, really shocked by it. Like, it's not just Korea, Japan. It's all over Europe. It's stagnating in America. I wouldn't be surprised if Canada is below rate, because right now, if you guys don't know, it's very, very easy to immigrate to Canada right now. They're looking for immigrants. And when I looked at this job site, where if you want to immigrate to Canada, they're looking for people to fill certain job positions, but they're not even highly skilled. Like, I'm going to be don't think I'm joking. You can even immigrate to Canada as a janitor. I saw it on the list, a janitor. Someone who's doing warehouse work can immigrate to Canada. So I looked at that like, whoa, like this is like desperation, it looks like. But yeah, I was quite shocked by a lot of these different things that I saw. In the comment section, a lot of good questions coming out, and I really enjoy them, and especially with this week's message about tithing, right? Tithing is an important thing for people because it's money, right? It's the hard-earned money that you make. And tithing is very interesting, and there's a question that came up in the comment section about one person not tithing because they don't know how the pastor will use the money, right? And I do think on one side of it, it is a legit way of thinking, right? Because, tithing can be difficult if you look at it from the perspective of looking at it as, oh, I put so much hard work and I earned this money. I put so much effort into it, and to just give it away to someone, I have no idea how they're going to spend it. Oh, like it just feels like a waste to me, right? And I would say that is a valid thought to have, but I do think that I think everyone should be thinking that way, but not extremely, right? And I would say the answer came out in this week's message. The best way to deal with it is to talk to your church, talk to your leaders, and make sure that the church reveals general finances every month. Like Sansim did say, of course you can't say everything, but at least the general finances should be coming out each and every month, right? It came out of the Sunday message. Sansim said, yeah, it's good for churches to report on it, right? Some things you don't have to, I don't think you need every little detail, but most of it should come out. Right? And this is the reason I like I said before, is transparency is important, not so much for Like, is just because you're not transparent doesn't mean that the company or the church is bad or they're doing bad things. But it gives that image that you're hiding something. So transparency allows both the leadership and the members to kind of be on the same page, like, hey, we're not doing anything bad. So take a look at this, and it allows trust to form between the two, right? So that's why this person might not have that trust towards the leadership yet to even give the tithe, right? But I'm going to talk personally now. I would not withhold my tithing for that reason, right? Tithing and how it is spent, generally speaking, so I said generally, they are not tied together, right? My tithing is between me and God, and I do this because of obedience. I do it because I'm thankful to God, and how it's spent is not going to change that dedication I give to God, okay? Now, when would it become a problem? I would say when it turns into corruption, right? When there's corruption, right? Like, corruption is completely different than misspending, okay? So corruption is like, let's take the recent situation where there's a lawsuit against AJ about embezzlement, and she has a bunch of properties, and we don't know if it's true or not yet, but it's going through a court, but there seems to be enough evidence to take it to court. Remember, in the Korean justice system, there will be an investigation, and if there's enough information in the investigation, they will take it to court. So there is enough information out there and in evidence to at least take it to trial. And of course, corruption is something that you don't want to give your money to, right? It's true. Like, even there's another good friend of mine who withheld their tithes for the past couple of months just to make sure that their church, this is after March 12th when you had the spiritual Oppenheimer. No one knows whose side someone is on, but they wanted to check to make sure that these people were on the right side that they agree with. And then they gave the tithing that they didn't give in the past. And that makes a lot more sense because you're not even really sure if you're giving to the right church, right? But generally speaking, tithing is just between you and God. And in most cases, I believe you shouldn't have a say in how it is spent, right? Because we're not a company of shareholders where each person who tithes controls how the church uses the money. I think that would be a big misstep when it comes to church, because then church will really become all about money, right? And that's why a church or every healthy organization trusts the board of directors or the leadership or the finance team that it will be used for this history, right? Will there be some things you don't agree with, like that they're buying? And the answer is sure, right? That's normal. In every church, if you have 100 people, if you buy something, 45 of them are going to disagree. 45% are going to disagree with it. It's just normal that you're not going to have every single person who agrees with what is being bought, right? So yeah, there's going to be preferences. There's going to be misspending in your eyes, but to other people, it's going to be, yeah, I think it's okay to do it. But in most cases, like I said, most churches, what they spend on, you're mainly going to be disagreeing with preference more than something that is corruption. That's going to be the bigger thing, right? Like, for instance, someone would say something like, well, you bought this, but I would prefer you spend more money on a faster internet connection, or we need more comfortable chairs, or we need flowers every week, or we need to put a little bit more money into ministry, or, these are all preferences. And this is why there has to be discussion, not with the entire church. Like, the only time the entire church needs to be discussed with is when you're going to go buy a new church or something along that line, or something super huge. But when most of the purchases people make are not that vital, right? They're not vital, but it should never be in the hands of one person. Like, that's where corruption I'm not saying there is corruption, right? If one person is making decisions for finances, I'm not saying there's corruption. I am just saying that it gives it's a bigger chance of corruption happening. You need 2-3 people to be discussing it, right? So, barring corruption, as long as there's no corruption, right? As long as there's no corruption, I wouldn't withhold tithing for that reason. Well, I don't know what they're spending it on. Well, all you need to do is ask, right? And I would not sit there and say that, I think it's dangerous to set a precedent of, well, if you don't buy this, then I'm not paying tithe. That's the wrong way of doing it. Tithing is between you and God. So pay your tithes, discuss with the leaders on how it is spent. I would say that if you don't pay your tithes for that reason, you are losing out. That's the only person losing there is actually you for the blessings you will receive, right? Because God says he will bless. He will open up the coffers and he will bless you. You not paying tithe for that reason is only withholding God's blessings from you. That's what I see, right? So I wouldn't withhold my tithing for that reason. I would pay my tithes and discuss with the leaders on how it is spent, find out how the system is, right? So like I said, and I would actually say, except for pioneering churches, usually the pastor is not the person that makes decisions on finances. Usually, like they're not the only one. Like even when I was pioneering a church in London, like 2005, around that time, there was a finance person, and then there was me, and there was we had a leadership team of like 4 or 5 people, and we would talk and discuss about it because that's a pioneering church. So even then, it wouldn't just be the pastor by themselves making that decision, right? There's usually a finance person, and finance is usually not one person. Finance is usually two or more, because that stops corruption from happening too. You don't want one person in charge of all the money of finance, right? And as the church gets larger and larger, the more people are involved in decisions, right? When I was a head leader in New York, we started off with 73 people. We ended off with 113, 114, 115, something along that line. And I didn't make the decisions for purchases by myself. Oh, it was all discussed, right? There were 2 or 3 finance people. There was an elders group that would vote on purchases over $1,000. So in my case, I didn't have the power to make decisions for finance. I didn't, right? So that's why I would definitely not withhold my tithing for that reason, because it's so easily taken care of by just asking, hey, how does finance work? Can we get a finance report every month? Who's the person in charge of finance? And if you have someone in charge of finance, you could just ask them, hey, how's the money being spent? I'm just curious about this. Can we get like a report every month? Or you don't even need to report it. You just have like a Google Doc that is always updated all the time, where anyone at any time can look at that Google Doc. Like there's so many ways of doing it. And I think, yeah, withholding it for that reason, I do, like I said, barring corruption, which I don't think there's going to be a lot of corruption in a lot of churches, and a lot of churches probably don't even have that much money anyways, but barring corruption, I do think that is, it's so easily remedied, right? So, if it's just about trust with the pastor, like I said, as long as there's no corruption, it's just easily remedied. Just ask. Ask the finance person, ask the pastor, ask how does finance work? And like I said, you're not going to agree with all the ways and all the things that they purchase. And you can make suggestions, but like I said, it doesn't sound right if someone uses their tithing as a ransom. Meaning, if you don't buy this, if you don't do it this way, I will withhold my tithing, right? Like, there shouldn't be anything like that happening anyways, right? So that's my suggestion. Ask about the finances in your church. Ask the person in charge of finances, and try to find a way to get reports out so that it's more transparent, so there's more trust, and like there's open communication when it comes to finance. And don't be so controlling with your money, but be more thoughtful. The biggest thing that's going to matter is between you and God. That's the number one thing. Right? Like I said, withholding your tithes for that reason, I don't think it's a really good reason, but the only thing that you are withholding is actually your blessing that God gives from tithings, right? So that would be my suggestion, and that's my personal feeling on this too, as being in the position of a head leader, knowing how decisions are made. It's never made by a single person, never, right? Well, I'm not going to say never, because it's possible you can have a church that's 2 or 3 people, pioneering church. But then again, if it's a pioneering church, you don't have much money to be corrupt with anyways. So it's something different that I do think it's something that is easily remedied, right? So I hope that answers your question too. That is from the YouTube comments. Last thing I want to talk about before we get into our first break is this interesting story that this guy talked about. Okay, so I was listening to was it a podcast or a YouTube short, and this was a story. So there's a guy who's in jail, And, him and his wife write letters to each other, but he knows that there's soldiers that are reading his email, or not email, sorry, his mail to him and his wife. They read, it's just what happens in prison. They read what's coming in and out, right? So one day there's a letter that comes from the wife that says, I can't plant potatoes anymore. The ground is too hard. I can't get through to the soil, right? And the guy in jail, the husband, writes back and says, do not dig near the house, because that's where I've dug all the weapons. The next day, all the soldiers go to that guy's house, and they bring their pickaxes and shovels, start digging around, and they're looking for these weapons, right? The next day, or the next week, the wife wrote again and says, you'll never believe this, but all these soldiers came and dug around the house. And the man writes back, now you can plant your potatoes. Right? So it's very interesting, right? So one of the lessons he says, like, you can't, we only see things based on where we sit. Like some people say, oh, these soldiers, they're listening into my my letters, and and how dare they go and like dig into my house and try to find this, and this. And that's only looking from the position of where we sit. How dare they do that? How can they do this? How can they listen to these letters? Oh, they're wrong for going there and doing that. But we have to be open to the larger picture, right? Because if we only look from our perspective, we don't see what's happening in the larger perspective. And it reminded me of, in the same way, we have no idea what is happening in our lives and what God is doing for us. Like sometimes it seems that what God is doing is destructive, right? Like, oh my gosh, God, or like it's something that's so bad in our life. Like, God, how can this happen? How does this tribulation happen like this? And, we think that God is like those soldiers who are like overstepping their bounds, reading letters and doing stuff like this, right? But if we wait a little longer, we see that it was necessary. And through that, this woman was once again able to start planting potatoes, right? Like one example I give to you is the protests. For those of you guys who didn't know, in the beginning, the protests started in mid-July. The protests were frowned upon by headquarters. They're like, oh, don't do this, don't do this. And at the beginning, headquarters was against it, right? Because, you got to think about it. What if it's bad press? What if it makes the trial even worse for Sunseam, right? However, as it continued to go on, we see that by the end, it's garnering so much attention from the government. Now, even other organizations and even Christian pastors are supporting us from that the last protest that we had. So I think that in life too, we're going to be praying, we're going to be on God's side, and we're going to face some things that are quite scary, or we think that is completely negative against us, right? Like, these, now it looks like from the slanderers' Instagram that they're going to start to sue Providence churches, right? To get rid of these churches, right? Like these churches are just a front for a sex trafficking organization, or whatever it is, right? I talked about this, like, oh my gosh, God, why is this happening? Right? Some people are like, what should we do? If they want their offering back, should we just pay them back their offerings, give them what they want, settle for what they want so we can get rid of this? And, for us, we may be scared. Other people might be scared, like, oh, but then if we don't do it, then what if they bring Providence into the news, and then all of a sudden we're out in the newspapers and stuff like that. However, I think the one thing that we keep forgetting is that reality is that we don't know what God has in store. Like this can lead to something even greater or bigger. Like the one thing Sunseam says about tribulation is when you're on the ocean, the winds and the waves are like really strong. The winds and the waves push you towards your destination faster. If it's just calm day, you have no wind, so you have to paddle, and it just floats along. The reality is, we don't know what God has in store for these things, and that's why we need to pray. As they say in show business, any publicity, there's no such thing as bad publicity, and you'll see it in when someone has bad publicity, their album sales go up, their book sales go up. We really don't know. If our name comes out in the country, that we are the Providence Church. Is it really bad? We don't know. Or it could be the catalyst to bring more people to be interested in this history, right? Just like Korea, it was a scary moment to do these protests. And it started off with just a couple of hundred people, right? The first one, I believe, was like 300 people. And then now it's all the way up to 50,000 people with new allies that would have never been with us, but they see the corruption in the courts. And if you think about it, because we are opening people's eyes to the corruption in the courts, all these other societies and organizations have every interest to support us, because they know, like, even if they disagree with our church, they know that the government or the courts can do the same thing to them. Even though they don't believe, like the Protestant church pastors, they don't agree with us. They think we're heretical. But they see that if they can do this to a church, they can do this to us too. They have every reason to help us on principle for their future's sake, right? So I do think that all of us also have to really think about we're on God's side. As long as we put the words into action, we pray, we do the things that we need to do. One of the big things that's going to happen is that we are going to be able to see how God is going to even use the worst case scenarios to make things better, right? I'll give probably the greatest example is it was never meant to go to the cross, right? Jesus never meant to go there as the first plan A option. But even through something so terrible as the Messiah dying on the cross, it built this history over the last 2,000 years where we have like 3 billion people who believe in Jesus, which is inspiring, right? So I hope it's something that when you listen, I listen to the stories like, wow, that's like our situation right now. But comment what you thought about that too. Would love to hear what you guys are thinking about these different things that I'm talking about, whether it's the birth rate or, like the tithing or this. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this also. And let's you know what? I think this makes up for the sermons in the sky that I didn't do last week. But either way, let's get into the first break of the day.
Confident, unshaken. We are proud, unwavering. Confident now. We are so proud. Hey, have you caught a vibe by now?
Our clock is ticking, the hands of our clock keep on moving, they never stop. 'Cause we are following the timing of God who is mighty, we don't stop.
I will do the work I must do. I'm the key to the outcome that I want.
With the truth of the times we run diligently, we're making history. I trust in the power that God's given me. I make myself better every day. Since God is with us, supporting us always, we can never lose while we are on this path. No matter what comes our way, whatever may happen now.
Hey, have you caught a vibe by now? So what?
Confident, we're confident, yeah, doesn't matter what may come.
Confident, unshaken.
Confident, we're confident, yeah, come what may, we'll stand as
We
one.
are proud, unwavering.
Confident, unshaken.
Confident now.
We are proud, unwavering.
We are so proud.
Confident, we're confident, yeah.
Hey, have you caught a vibe by now? So what?
No matter what happens, we'll turn tables and we'll climb. Grab the time, fix our minds, fix our contradiction, we will shine. We'll shake it up like sneeze, say God bless you. If there's obstacles to block our way, we'll step right over. Ha ha. Gain momentum, don't tremble, moving forward, just one more step, and now we're going forward. We're following the time, we follow God how we come together, we're stronger. And like heaven, I am established, firm and shaken. And just like the sun, the will of God is never stopping. Like a backpack, God has my back, He's with me, so I'm safe. I'm so confident, I have dignity, whatever it may be. I'm ready to face with energy, battery charged up. I'm set up with the Lord, I'm confident, we're winning. Game, set.
Since God is with us, supporting us always, we can never lose while we are on this path. No matter what comes our way, whatever may happen now.
Hey, have you caught a vibe by now? So what?
Confident, we're confident, yeah, doesn't matter what may come.
Confident, unshaken.
Confident, we're confident, yeah, come with me, we'll stand as one.
We are proud, unwavering.
Confident, unshaken.
Confident now. you caught a vibe by now?
So what? Yeah, since God is with us, we are confident, unshaken. Yeah, the Holy Spirit is with us, we are proud, unwavering. Since God is with us, we are confident, unshaken. The Holy Spirit is with us, we are proud, unwavering. Since we live by God, we'll do it confidently, do it confidently.
Hey, have you caught a vibe by now?
So what?
All right, so let's get into today's word study. And every Wednesday we do have the Bible word study. But over the last couple of weeks, I have been going over like very huge, very foundational books of Christianity. And today I want to talk about a book that we've probably all seen the movie too, which is The Chronicles of Narnia, right? And this is written by C.S. Lewis, and we did go into his book, Mere Christianity, which is one of the foundational books too. And that's a book that I do recommend you read. But if you want something a little bit more fun, that is more of an allegory and has symbolism, it is the book, the Chronicles of Narnia. And I do believe there's like 8 volumes. But the first one is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Very, very fun book. And I wanted to do like a quick summary of it and then just go into all the different symbolisms and allegories and stories that are inside that C.S. Lewis, who is a devout Christian, he wrote it with these things in mind. So those of you guys who haven't seen Narnia, I would say it's probably better for you to read the book. Okay, so let's talk about the story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I watched this movie when I was like less than 10 years old. Great movie. They did a great rendition of it. I loved it. And it starts off with like these 4 children, 4 siblings, and they were sent to live in the country with some like eccentric professor. His name was Professor Kirk. And this was during World War II. Okay, so there's Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. Okay, and the last name is Pevensie. So Peter, Susan, Edmund, Lucy, Pevensie. Okay, so the children explore the house on a rainy day, and Lucy, who is the youngest, finds an enormous wardrobe. And Lucy steps inside and finds herself in a strange, snowy wood. Lucy encounters the fawn Tumnus, who is surprised to meet a human girl. So Tumnus tells Lucy that she has entered Narnia, which is a different world, and Tumnus invites Lucy to tea, and she accepts. Lucy and Tumnus have a wonderful tea, but the fawn bursts into tears, and this is like one of those like half goat, half human looking people, right? And Tumnus eventually bursts into tears and confesses that he is a servant of the evil White Witch. And the witch has enchanted Narnia so that it is always winter and never Christmas. So Tumnus explains that he has been enlisted to capture human beings. Lucy implores Tumnus to release her, and he agrees. Lucy exits Narnia and eagerly tells her siblings about her adventures in the wardrobe. Of course, they don't believe her. However, they don't believe her, but Lucy's siblings insist that Lucy has only gone for seconds and not for hours, as she claims. Now, when the Pevensie children look in the back of the wardrobe, they see that it's an ordinary piece of furniture. Edmund teases Lucy mercilessly about her imaginary country until one day when he sees her vanishing into the wardrobe. Edmund follows Lucy and finds himself in Narnia as well. He doesn't see Lucy and instead meets the White Witch that Tumnus told Lucy about. Now, the White Witch introduces herself to Edmund as the Queen of Narnia. The witch feeds Edmund enchanted Turkish delight, which is like some sweet candy, which gives Edmund an insatiable desire for that dessert. So the witch uses Edmund's greed and gluttony to convince Edmund to bring back his siblings to meet her. Now, on the way back to the lamppost, right, this is where you go back into the wardrobe, the border between Narnia and the human world, Edmund meets Lucy. And Lucy tells Edmund about the White Witch. And of course, Edmund denies any connection between the witch and the queen. Now, all Edmund can think about is Turkish delight. And Lucy and Edmund return to Peter and Susan back in their own world. Now, Lucy relies on Edmund to support her story about Narnia. But interestingly, Edmund spitefully tells Peter and Susan that it's a silly story. Peter and Susan are worried that Lucy is insane, so they talk to Professor Kirk. And now the professor shocks Peter and Susan by arguing that Lucy is telling the truth. So one day, the children hide in the wardrobe to avoid the housekeeper and some house guests. And suddenly all 4 Pevensie children find themselves in Narnia. Lucy leads them to Tumnus's home, but a note informs them that Tumnus has been arrested on charges of treason. Lucy realized that this means the witch knows that Tumnus spared Lucy's life and that the witch has captured Tumnus. So Lucy implores her siblings to help her rescue Tumnus from the witch, and guided by a friendly Robin, the children wander into the woods and meet Mr. Beaver, which obviously is a beaver, right? So Mr. Beaver brings them back to his home, where he explains that the children cannot do anything to save Tumnus. The only thing the children can do is join Mr. Beaver on a journey to see Aslan, who is a lion. Now, Aslan appears to be a king or god figure in Narnia, and the children are pleasantly enchanted by the name Aslan. Now, except for Edmund, who is horrified by the sound of it, the name Aslan, but the other children are fine, right? But Mr. Beaver, Peter, Susan, and Lucy plot to meet Aslan at the stone table the following day. But they soon notice that Edmund has disappeared. So what is Edmund doing? He's searching for the White Witch to warn her of Aslan's arrival and of the Beaver's plan. So the witch is enraged to hear that Aslan is in Narnia and immediately begins plotting to kill the children. Now the witch wants to avoid an ancient prophecy that says that 4 humans will someday reign over Narnia and overthrow her evil regime. Right? So that's why, of course, they get rid of humans in Narnia when she's leading, right? So the children and the beaver, meanwhile, rush to reach the stone table before the witch, and as they travel, wonderful seasonal changes occur. First, they meet Santa Claus, and who explains that the witch's spell of always winter, never Christmas has ended. The enchanted winter snow melts, and the children see signs of spring. Simultaneously, the witch drags Edmund towards the stone table and treats him very poorly. Now, once spring arrives, the witch cannot use her sled, right, anymore, so she can't reach the stone table before the children. Now, when the other 3 Pevensies meet Aslan, they are awed by him, but they quickly grow more comfortable in his presence. They love him immediately, despite their fear. And Aslan promises to do all that he can to save Edmund, and he takes Peter aside to show him the castle where he will be king. As they are talking, they hear Susan blowing the magic horn that Father Christmas gave to her, signaling that she is in danger. So Aslan sends Peter to help her, and arriving on the scene, Peter sees a wolf attacking Susan and stabs the wolf to death with the sword given to him by Father Christmas. Now Aslan sees another wolf vanishing into a thicket and sends his followers to trail it, hoping it will lead them to the witch. Now, the witch is preparing to kill Edmund as the rescue party arrives. Aslan and his followers rescue Edmund, but are unable to find the witch, who disguises herself as part of the landscape. Edmund is happy to see his siblings as he has accepted that the witch is evil. The next day, the witch and Aslan speak, and the witch demands Edmund's life because she says that Edmund is a traitor. Now, according to the deep magic of Narnia, a traitor's life is forfeit to the witch. Aslan does not deny this, but then he secretly reaches a compromise with her. The witch appears very pleased, while Aslan seems pensive and depressed. So the following night, Susan and Lucy observe Aslan they're observing Aslan growing increasingly gloomy and sad. The sisters are unable to sleep, and they notice that Aslan has disappeared. Susan and Lucy leave the pavilion to search for Aslan, and when they find him, he tells them they can stay until he tells them they must leave. So together, Aslan, Susan, and Lucy walk to the stone table, where Aslan tells them to leave. Susan and Lucy hide behind some bushes and watch the witch and a horde of her followers torment, humiliate, and finally kill Aslan. The witch explains that Aslan sacrificed his life for Edmund. Susan and Lucy stay with Aslan's dead body all night, but in the morning, they hear a great cracking noise and are astounded to see the stone table broken. Aslan has disappeared. Suddenly, Susan and Lucy hear Aslan's voice from behind him, and Aslan has risen from the dead. Aslan carries the girls to the witch's castle, where they free all the prisoners who have been turned to stone. Aslan, Susan, and Lucy charge Well, they join the battle between Peter's army and the witch's troops. Peter and his troops are exhausted, but fortunately Aslan swiftly kills the witch, and Peter's army then defeats the witch's followers. So Aslan knights Edmund, who has atoned for his sin of siding with the witch, and the children ascend to the thrones at Cair Paravel, the castle in Narnia. So Aslan subsequently disappears. The children eventually become adults and reign over Narnia for many years. One day, in a hunt for a magical white stag, they arrive at the lamppost that had marked the border between Narnia and the human world. The Pevensies tumble back out of the wardrobe to the human world. No time has passed, and they return to Professor Kirk's house as children. The foursome tells Professor Kirk about their adventure, and the professor assures them that they will return to Narnia again someday. Right? So it's a really, like, it's such an interesting story. Many people know about this too. I hope you guys can read this one. If you want something fun or for your children, your nieces and nephews, great Christian storybook from C.S. Lewis. And obviously you're going to look at some of the symbolism there. Like Aslan the lion obviously represents Jesus. Like he died, he came back to life again. He's the king of the wood, the son of the emperor, right? The son, right? And Aslan is mocked, beaten, and killed only to rise again. The stone tablet, they say, is supposed to be the curtain inside, the long heavy curtain hanging in the temple, separating the holy place and the most holy place, which rips when Jesus dies, right? So the stone table breaks in half after Aslan is killed. So there's another big one. The fact that Aslan in the beginning was feared and then loved is kind of showing like God's presence. Like God, when we are with God, we have that fear and love towards God. You know what I mean? So that's why it was kind of shown in that way. The four siblings, the Pevensie siblings, they are kind of like symbolism of all the apostles, right? All the apostles, good and bad. And of course, Edmund is more like a Judas Iscariot. But you could say he's more like a Paul because he went against and was a traitor, but then he repented and became someone who became a king too, right? So this is Edmund would be the Judas Iscariot, but more of like a Peter, as in Peter who denied Jesus 3 times and then came back and repented, or a Paul who would come against, he'd be a traitor to Jesus, and then he would come and be one of the strongest people for him, right? And, you know, if you were like to symbolize, say, Susan and Lucy, because they were the ones who watched Aslan die, right, on the stone table, you could look at them more as like a Mary Magdalene or Mary, the mother of James, who watched Jesus being mocked and abused and who cared for his corpse after his death too, right? So that's quite interesting also. The Turkish delight, which is that enchanted candy given to Edmund, you could look at that as a tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. That's the fruit. One taste and the need for more is insatiable, and it provides a taste of sin and represents man's inability to stop sinning. The professor, Professor Kirk, is very, very interesting because he uses the Christian reasoning of the trilemma, which is liar, lunatic, or Lord, in defending Lucy to her siblings, right? So you have to read the book to understand this. And the same argument Christians often invoke in discussions of Jesus as the Son of God. But that's other different things that you can look at there also. But yeah, it's a very, very Christian-centered book. I do bring it as a recommendation. If you don't like books, which I do recommend the book first, you can watch the movie Narnia, which I didn't think was very good anyways. I would rather watch the old one from the 70s or 80s. Like that one for me was a lot more mystical and magical too, but not having as much CGI and stuff like that. But definitely I would go to the book first, right? So that's C.S. Lewis with the book The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Hope you guys really enjoyed that kind of summary, and I hope it kind of compels you to go read that book also. All right. There it is, guys. That is the final. That is the end of today's Bible word study, which we are going into books, right? Books that shape Christianity or books that are very, very fun to read also. Okay? So that means let's get into our second break of the day.
just by brushing by. But if skin brushes skin, will they just merely connect? That will make them turn into lovers. If clothing brushes clothes, it could last for 10 years. But if it's skin to skin, 100 years. If it's our hearts that touch them together, we should live for 1,000 years. Two people may connect just by brushing by. But if skin brushes skin, will they just merely connect? That will make them turn into lovers. If clothing brushes clothes, it could last for 10 years. But if it's skin to skin, 100 years. If it's our hearts that touch them together, we should live for 1,000 years. So then, if we're brushed by God, how many years should we remain by His side, living together? Years aren't enough to measure. We must live forever, tied to each other, always together We'll live in perfect
Okay, so let's get into our final segment for today on this wonderful Wednesday. We have Health is Happiness, and today we're continuing with Julius Miumo, who's going over how to manage your weight. Did a lot of research on this. Hope you guys enjoy this one. This is part 4, right? So there's six parts to this. Hope you guys really enjoy this. This is Julius Miumo, all the way over there from Australia, with Health is Happiness.
Hi everyone, Julius here, and welcome to the Health is Happiness segment. Here's where we discuss all the different ways we can improve health for a happy life, both physically and spiritually. This is episode 13, and today we're going to continue with part 4 on how to manage your weight. So let's get started. Today we're going to continue with our discussion about carbohydrates. Last time we kicked off the conversation by discussing how to classify the ideal carbohydrates to eat using glycemic index and glycemic load. We also talked about sugar and fruit in particular, so go check that out if you missed out. Today, we're going to continue by talking about the main carbs that everyone is thinking about. That's the breads, the pastas, the cereals, etc. But before we get into it, I want to start off by talking about gluten. Now, over the last few years, at least in the Western English-speaking nations, there has been a rising gluten-free fad going on. Now, I don't necessarily mean that in a good or bad way. I'm just pointing out that it's become a significant trend to the point that many food manufacturers have felt the need to make a lot of gluten-free versions of their food. You can find such options in supermarkets, cafes, and restaurants. So I thought it would be important to talk about this topic since bread and pasta is such a staple source of carbohydrates in the West. Honestly, for me, I cut out most of the gluten from my diet, and I saw tremendous benefits. I used to get these prolonged stomach aches after playing really intense soccer matches, and those stomach problems began to go away. Also, my joint problems that were increasingly prevalent also went away. I had less brain fog and I had more energy. I didn't necessarily have celiac disease, but I found I was somewhat intolerant to gluten, to a certain degree at least. When I was in my teens, I didn't really take notice of the symptoms, since they hadn't really progressed that much until I got more into my 20s. It was really, really hard for me because I loved bread, I loved pastas, I loved cereal. These were among my most favorite foods. I literally had such a hard time just walking past the bread aisle, especially when there were croissants involved. I really had to switch up my whole diet, but the benefits were really worth it. I do eat foods with gluten every now and then, but rarely and in small amounts. With that being said, if breads and pastas have been a staple food for centuries, especially in the West, one might ask, why all of a sudden are there so many people having problems with gluten intolerance? Having done some research, I found some interesting findings that may explain the reason. There are a lot of people from America who actually reported not having the same stomach problems eating bread while in Europe, in comparison to eating bread in the US. The doctor who did the research found that food regulations were much more stricter in Europe in comparison to the United States, which yielded better food quality. For instance, a lot of wheat in America is sprayed with a pesticide called glyphosate, which does damage to the gut microbiome. On top of that, they do not allow wheat fortification with synthetic vitamins in Europe. Furthermore, the process used by commercial food manufacturers deviates from the proper process of preparing bread and pasta. We, as human beings, don't have the enzymes to completely dismantle the protein gluten. What we do is a partial digestion, and these undigestible fragments can instigate inflammation and damage the gut lining. In order to make bread, first of all, you add yeast and water to make the dough. Yeast has the enzymes that can completely dismantle this toxic element. In Europe, bread is still made in the old-fashioned way, following an overnight process that takes 10 to 12 hours, which is enough time for the enzymes to dismantle these fragments. Meanwhile, in other places, commercial breads, pastas are made with an artificially accelerated 2-hour process, which is not enough time for the gluten to be made more digestible by the enzymes in the yeast. Combine that with the fact that there are already major disruptions to our gut microbiome from our modern lifestyle, we can see why there's such an increase in food sensitivities and inflammatory diseases. Bottom line is, gluten is not evil if you don't have a celiac disease. It's a matter of how the bread and pasta is prepared. So with that being said, let's actually talk about and discuss the different types of carbohydrates, starting with bread. A lot of breads, not only white bread, but also brown, is considered refined because of the way it's been processed. Due to the physical structure of bread, most of them have a high GI score, 70 and above. Flour that whether made from whole wheat or refined wheat digests more quickly than the whole grain because it's been ground into fine powder, so your body has less work to do to process it. However, there are certain types of bread that are much more healthier. So the first option is whole grain bread. I would like to point out that whole wheat and whole grain are different. Whole grain bread is actually made up of a mixture of other grains apart from just wheat, such as rye and barley. And this gives it a much lower GI score of around 50. So look for breads that are actually made with 100% whole grain. Sometimes they just make a portion of it whole grain and the rest of it whole wheat. These types of breads actually have a really high GI score still. Breads that are labeled multigrain can be deceiving because they often contain refined grains, and sometimes manufacturers also add sugar to the bread, so please check that on the label. Also check on the nutrition label for the amount of fiber. Look for breads that at least have 2 grams of fiber per slice and less than 1 or 2 grams of sugar. Preferably no sugar is the best. Another healthy choice of bread is sourdough bread. You can get brown sourdough bread, but generally it comes in white bread. Despite it being refined, it's because it's actually made through the fermentation of wheat flour, it ends up having a much lower GI score of around 54. The fermentation process also makes it easier to digest, so it's much easier on the gut compared to other types of bread. So you may wonder, why is white sourdough bread much lower in GI score compared to the other types of white bread? The answer has got to do with acid created by the fermentation process. So let me explain. There was a study done in Japan where they actually took a look at rice, since that was the most staple food in the country, or it is the most staple food. And they did some studies on rice looking at the glycemic index by itself as compared to combining rice with other meals. There are two things that they looked at in particular, and one was vinegar. And it turned out that when you added vinegar to the rice, the glycemic index was reduced significantly. In sushi rice, which has a GI of up to 89, it dropped all the way down to 54. That's a 40% drop. They also found that eating pickled vegetables with the rice also reduced the GI score by about 25%. Also, taking bean products like miso soup and natto also blunted the GI response. There were other separate studies done also with lemon juice, and they found that adding lemon juice to the carbohydrates reduced the GI response from up to 40 to 50%. So how does this happen? It's actually got to do with how the body digests starch. The first component of digestion is salivary, and then the second is pancreatic. As soon as we start eating and chewing carbs, the saliva starts to digest the carbohydrates and break down the starches. Well after you've chewed your food and swallowed it, because the pH of the stomach goes up, the enzymes from the saliva are still active, and they continue to digest the starch while it's in the stomach. Then a couple of hours later, the pH of your stomach goes down, and these enzymes end up being inactivated. So adding the acid into your food lowers the pH in your stomach, which ends up inactivating these enzymes from the saliva that break down the starches. As a result, the digestion process is much slower. So you might want to consider adding fermented foods, vinegar or lemon juice to blunt the insulin response from these carbohydrates. Japanese sushi, for example, tends to be made with rice vinegar, and that's what makes it sticky. Speaking of rice, short grain rice tends to be a lot more higher in GI compared to long grain rice, like basmati rice. For those trying to lower their insulin response, it would be better to eat basmati rice or opt for brown rice. The only catch with brown rice is it's important to soak it for a few hours or overnight, and then drain the water to reduce the arsenic content in the rice before cooking it. Now, how about pasta? Pasta is also refined like most breads, unless you eat the brown pasta. However, it's not quite the same as eating white bread. The pasta's starch structure is much more dense and less vulnerable to digestive enzymes, especially when cooked to al dente. It's made from a different type of wheat in a different type of way, and which breaks down much more slowly in digestion. As a result, it has a much lower GI, around 50. However, there is a catch. Pasta has a very high glycemic load of 20, which means unless you're an athlete, you do need to keep your portion sizes small. Now, what about cereal? This was my favorite breakfast food growing up. Unfortunately, most cereals are refined carbohydrates and really don't do much good. Almost most of them contain sugar, and a lot of it for that fact. On top of that, Add milk into the mixture and you're pretty much combining refined carbohydrates, sugar and fat, and that's a very bad combo. The few cereals that I know that are pretty healthy are plain oats, all bran flakes, the ones with no added sugar or very little sugar, and just plain old Weetabix. Those are really the only ones that I could find. Most of the other ones either are too refined and turn into blood glucose really quickly, or they have just way too much sugar. Now, there are many other healthy, unrefined, starchy carbohydrates that I would consider great additions to one's diet. These include sweet potato, quinoa, beans, chickpeas, and lentils. Of course, you have the non-starchy carbs, which are basically your carrots, cucumbers, and non-root vegetables. So that's it for today's episode, and that is part 4 on how to manage your weight. Now, if you would like me to elaborate on any particular points, please drop a comment below. And next episode, we will continue with part 5, and we're going to talk about healthy and unhealthy sources of fat. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.
And thank you so much, Julius, for another wonderful episode of Health is Happiness. This is a replay, but I thought it was very, very good for us to go over certain things that a lot of people haven't heard yet. And this is a very big topic a lot of people think about, is how to manage your weight. Great tips here on part 4. Hope you guys enjoyed. Leave some comments below for Julius too. Okay? So there it is, guys. That is the end of today's Wednesday podcast. Hope you guys have an amazing and awesome service tonight. And we'll see you guys again tomorrow on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and feel your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, you know. I'm on the Morning Star Drive, you know. I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me